everyone. I'm Valeria Tinini, and this is Magdalene Codes, and today's guest is David Sereda. Hi, David.
Hi.
How are you?
Really high because I did my breathing this morning. Every 2 months, I do a whole month of this breathing technique I call the breath of God, the Ruach, which it's all done to a guided meditation. And I breathe for 40 minutes every day for 30 days. And I've been doing this for 8 years. So every quarter, so that's 4 times a year, 120 sessions a year of this deep breathing technique. And God breathed the life of the Spirit of God, the living Spirit of God, into Adam and Eve, animating the first humans as a living Spirit of God. So Adam is considered, even in the Gnostic Gospels, to be such a superior human that there wouldn't be one human on the earth today that would even compare to Adam and Eve. Because the Spirit of God, the breath, the Ruach of God, was directly breathed into to animate, the first living spirited human. So when you do this breathing technique, if you ever look at a dog and you see them panting and they're so happy, one of the reasons they're so happy and why I actually feel so much bliss right now is because they breathe. But as we go through our life and we become very heady, we have to get degrees in school, and you have to get, a doctorate degree or a PhD, whatever degrees we get tighter and tighter and tighter. Pretty soon you don't breathe much. You take really shallow breaths and we're barely breathing. But if you actually breathe, expand the chest, and take another breath. And you do that for 45 minutes, you should see how high you get. And you do this for 30 days in a row every quarter. But what I notice with people when I start them on this breath of God technique is they'll be able to take about 5 breaths and then they get scared. Because when you breathe, you're actually awakening the life force, the living spirit life force within you. And we're so used to being in a more deadened state where we're not alive and we're uncomfortable with being that alive. So people tend to stop breathing.
Okay. Well, we'll probably talk about that more as we
yeah
talk.
I just wanted to
We'll get deeper into your experiences. So right away, I want to talk about how you had the experience with meeting or encountering Jesus Christ, the Christ, in this lifetime. And then, of course, I'll ask you furthermore, and we'll go deeper into what you had experience with Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, see, for me, I really wasn't as satisfied as a person who was just going to believe something or not believe something. What do you believe? And I think a lot of belief is fear-based, that people use fear. If you don't believe this, you're going to burn in hell. If you believe, the wrong thing, you're going to burn in hell. So we used a lot of fear. But I wanted to meet God myself in person. So I set on a quest.
Well, let me ask you something. Were you Catholic or Christian or before?
Well, I was baptized Catholic, but I remember my baptism. I was only 3 weeks old. Remember it very well. I can still see the priest who baptized me in my mind right now. And I was so aware at that age that he was spiritually blind. I looked at him and I was quite disgusted. I thought, you just believe this. You don't actually know God. You're just doing this ritual, but you're not.
Yeah, I had the same feeling.
Really awake in the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
But this is just a ritual doing it, and I understand you're doing this to me. I was fully aware of what I'm telling you at the moment of my baptism. But our family, my mom was tortured by nuns, and my father was Orthodox through the Ukrainian church in Canada, and my mom was Catholic and traditional Catholic. So all of my brothers and I, four of us, got baptized. And then when my mom had a stepson through my new stepfather, David Cooper, I don't think Stephen was baptized, but he became a fundamentalist Christian. Yeah.
So,
So I started meditating.
Yeah.
What's that?
So you had some awareness and kind of some sort of conditioning that Jesus Christ is a God.
Well, my father taught me later that Jesus was a master, a living master, who was someone who realized he was God, which is not something that only he could do. My father taught that anybody could realize that they are God through the process of interior awareness and illumination. And that when Jesus said that, he is the incarnation of God, an incarnation of God direct is an avatar, is a person who is born directly out of the Godhead, right? So in my belief system and what my father taught, Krishna, which some people say Krishna existed 5,000 years before the time of Christ, and some people say it was 5,000 years ago. Whatever it was so long ago that Krishna appeared that if you really read the Hindu Bhagavad Gita in its entirety, you really see the same story. It's the same story. Krishna appears. He gives his life teachings. He has a female counterpartner, Radha, and he has the ability to transmit the God consciousness into 5,000 girls, gopis, and he gives prophecy, and then he appears in the sky blazing like 10,000 suns, which is kind of his own second coming in a way. And then there's a war very similar to the, what people believe is going to happen in the book of Revelation, that there's going to be a war called the Battle of Armageddon, at the end of which they're expecting Christ to appear in the sky blazing like thousands of suns. Well, that already happened. That it was called the Battle of Kur, etc. And it happened thousands and thousands of years ago. And so the idea is that God can take birth into a human form directly from the Godhead, either female or male form, and appear to the human race for a period. They can appear as a human, although they're not human, like we are. And they don't have to do anything to get enlightened because they're born in that state. And then they do their work and they pass and they die, and then the world waits for another coming of God in the highest in the human system.
That was my next question. Do you feel, because it's been said that Krishna reincarnated as Jesus Christ, Krishna is just another
No,
word.
because it's God is unique. It's not like it has to be the same. It's not the same person. We identify with the person, but Christ is the consciousness and
Yes.
the light. That is the Christos light, which is a name given by the Greeks and the Greek system, as in the Christ and the crystal. But it wasn't even named that during the time, because the language of the Hebrews, the Hebrew language, comes from Aramaic. Aramaic is basically an ancient form of Hebrew, and the Hebrew language evolved. So, and that language evolves in a period in history that is so old that words that we're familiar with today probably weren't even used at that time.
Right.
So to say that God can only appear once and that's it for the whole history of the world is quite ridiculous. I mean,
I agree.
A lot of strict Christians believe that only they have the right God and everybody else basically got the
So
short end of the stick, and it will never happen again, and only they will be saved. I mean, this is just egoic mania.
so
It's a
you
form of egoic mania. But basically, I went on the path of meditation and meditating. By the time I was 18, I'm going to be 58 years old this year. By the time I was 18, I was meditating every day, very intensely. I wanted to meet God. I wanted to have my own experience. I didn't want to rely on a book. I didn't want to rely on what people said or what they believed, because I could look at them. I mean, my observation as a child, looking at the priest who baptized me, is he wasn't happy. He wasn't in a high state of God awareness. He didn't look like somebody who had ever met the God that he claims to represent, the Christ. And yet we put, as a civilization, so much emphasis on the process of what we call education and giving people degrees of education and awards, which is all intellectual. We don't qualify a priest spiritually from their heart center and their awareness. We don't even give people who receive visions of God positions in the world. We give people who went to university. So you go to Harvard, and you go to Harvard Divinity School, and you get a master's in divinity, and then you decide to become a teacher, or you become a priest or a priestess. You know, those are the people who end up in all these positions of power, and they claim to represent the living God. The living God is alive, not stuck in a university in a classroom. And I think that's where we really went wrong, is we thought that people who were qualified intellectually were qualified to represent God to our communities and our cities and our nations. And that's not how it worked. I mean, if you go, going ahead to the story of Joseph Smith, who is not qualified, who doesn't go to any kind of schooling like that, has a vision in upstate New York, near the lake, coming into what we call the Canadian border. And he sees an angel called Moroni, who gives him a story of angels and God in the Americas and Christ in the Americas. And he creates a whole church, a whole new church. Now, if you come to the Mormon church today, because that's where my story begins with this, when I had my first meetings with the Christ, is today you can't just have your experience and come into the Mormon church. You have to begin educated by the Mormon system, read the Book of Mormon, and you slowly work your way up within that church. Now, I have been meditating for years and years and years, and I had an experience in 1986 on the winter solstice, December 22nd and 23rd, 2 days in a row. I was taken out of my body through the 7 levels of heaven, just like the Prophet Muhammad. I went through the 7 levels of heaven. And each, without going into massive detail, because I have a really good recording of this for people who are interested in listening to what it's like to go through the 7 heavens, is when you go to the first heaven, it's 1,000,000 times the greatest love you've ever known as a human. So you could think of, who did you love the most as a human? Was it your lover? Was it your mom, your dad, your child? You would have to multiply that by 1,000,000, and you live in that state of perfect, unbelievable love with a human body that is very radiant, and you live in communities and cities in that first heaven. And God told me there were millions of planets that are suspended within the vibration of the first level of heaven. And then when I went to the second heaven, all of the love, all of the ecstasy, all the glory of God multiplies another 1,000,000 times. So it's exponential. It was extremely difficult to go to the second heaven. And I still had a human form in the second heaven. And then the third heaven is there's so much blinding love and ecstasy all day long there, and so many qualities that we don't have names for, that it's almost the end of the human form. Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a great Swedish mystic who had hundreds of visits to heaven, He never went past the third heaven. He said it was the highest heaven there is, and it's definitely not the highest heaven, but it is the highest heaven for the human form to exist in.
So can you?
I went to the fourth, fifth, sixth, and I came to the edge of the seventh, and there you don't have a human form there.
Are you? Are you? Are you aware of the self in the seventh?
Oh, of course. When you go to these higher levels of heaven, you start to merge with the universal self of God, and the universal self of God gets higher and higher. It's limitless. It's countless millions of light years across in size,
Yeah.
and you feel the whole thing. It's almost like you're becoming God.
Yeah.
And so
To me,
at
it's
these
very.
highest levels of super fields of light that can make up the size of an entire galaxy, the idea of being a human and a human personality that claims to be God is more and more ludicrous, because the identification with a single human person who claims to have created the entire creation of a single galaxy. I mean, today, the definition of a galaxy is so far beyond any biblical interpretation of a heaven. It dwarfs all biblical interpretations of how big a heaven could be. Like, you can look at the book of Revelation, you can look at the end of Revelation when the cube, it's a 1,500-mile cube, city of God comes down and lands on the earth. That's in the end of the Revelation. Well, that's tiny. That's a very, very holy city, a very high vibrational city. But when you see the size of the galaxy, like what I was experiencing when I went through the 7 levels of heaven, is each layer of heaven, your God realized self increases in vibration another 1,000,000 times. So there's so much ecstasy and love, you can barely move. Everything you look at is God. There's no identification of the ego self being this little person. So when we read a piece of paper that says, only by me can you enter the kingdom of heaven, the me of that person, the Christ, is the whole universe. So only by the body of the whole universe can you enter the whole universe.
Yeah.
It's not this little person. That's an ego. So we egoify a language, a word, and then we get all egotistical about it, and we arm ourselves with weapons, and we say, anybody who has a different God than me, I'm going to kill you. And that's what we did. So God looks and goes, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. They're going to go to war over me. And it wasn't my message at all. And then they're going to form different churches, and they're all going to be battling each other. Oh my God. And this is just absurd stuff. But that's because we're just little humans with these egos. So when I came to the border of the 7th heaven, it's so immense. There's no way a human can know what that is like to be whole, but it's all of our potential to eventually graduate from the first, the second, the third heaven, and so on. And Swedenborg went to the 3rd heaven, and he was so enamored in the bliss and the love and the ecstasy. He said, there's no way there could be a higher heaven than this. And he found, just like Dante Alighieri did, that everyone who lived there lived in the state that Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, which was they were completely naked. But every human had such a perfect body, there's no envy. And it's not like everybody's a bodybuilder, and they're filled with love, unbelievable love in their nude, perfect form.
Yes.
In the 3rd heaven. But when Dante goes, when you read the Divine Comedy and you're in the Paradiso, and Beatrice takes him through the different levels of heaven, he sees everybody's naked in the 3rd heaven, and it's like, I'm going to keep going. Beatrice says, you don't stop here. This is just the 3rd heaven. And then she takes him to the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th. And so the 8th and the 9th are reserved for the most super, super enlightened beings. And even the Prophet Muhammad is not, there's no description of him going past the 7th. There's there, so you think of an eighth and a ninth. And when Dante's in the ninth heaven and he sees the true Christ, the true image of a person, of what we call Jesus, dissolves into this sphere, this ever expanding sphere of a non-personal God, and merges with the infinite cosmos. He experiences this in the ninth. And God shows him there are 9 more heavens above these that not one angel, not one human, nobody has ever entered at that time in history, at the time of Dante. So it shows you the infinitude of the potential for all humans to graduate. Now, if you go all the way back to the time of Moses, when God in the Godhead, before the birth of the Christ child, appears on the top of Mount Sinai, you have to understand that this is still a tiny fraction of the total Godhead. But God tells Moses and his brother Aaron, who are armed with their staffs, to put markers around the mountain and tell the people not to cross the markers or they're going to die. And when God appears on the Sinai, Aaron, his brother, can get quite close to God, but he's not allowed to perceive God directly. Only Moses can. And God pretty much tells Moses that all the people, there's nobody worthy to come and see me except for you. The people are so corrupt. They're so disgusting in their ability to perceive that they're ruled by money. They worship the golden calf. They're greedy. They're possessive. They have all the lowest qualities of a human being. And so that there's no one qualified to cross the markers. Now, my experience is what happens, because I've met God in the highest and going through the 7th heavens, that I've met the Christ, is that you actually will burn, your corruption within you will incinerate as you try to get close to the face of God. So when you're not ready, you shouldn't step past that marker, because you're going to actually burn. And your soul will be consumed in flames, not because God's torturing you, because you have no ability to exist in that much love, because you're a greedy person. You're a person who, hoards money, or you're a person, just like the Catholic Church today. They hoard money, they abuse children, they abuse women, they do, everything they do is corrupt. The Catholic Church has no exemplary status to even be a million miles from the true face of God.
So, David, let me ask you,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel that Jesus Christ was a symbol of the time that he came during the 2,000 years that he was here, the 2,000 years ago that he was here? Was he a symbol, or was he an example of where man could go? Which one was it?
He wasn't even the total example where man and woman could go, because he didn't reveal the totality to all men and women. He revealed it to his inner circle of men and women. We know from the Gnostic Gospels and the canonized Gospels that you think of all the people that he physically encountered, there were very few people that would even notice the light that he beheld, that if you followed him, you were going to go into the kingdom of heaven and experience heaven. So of all the people walking on the ground, he had 72 lesser disciples, and he had 12 males and 7 women, is what we know from the Gnostic Gospels. That's all the people he convinced. But yet, in the post period, now remember, in the book of Revelation, it says that, now that he's died on the cross, I will return quickly and appear in the sky, and every eye shall see me blazing like the sun. Well, that happened with Krishna thousands of years ago. But when you read the Acts of Philip, the Acts of Philip is an incredible piece of literature, because we see Jesus appearing, I believe it's in what we call Athens, Greece, and he appears in the sky blazing like 1,000 suns. He's brighter than the sun. And so we have records of him appearing to the First Nations people in the Americas saw him. And the people in Central America saw him. So he fulfilled what he was going to do. He showed that there's no way you can kill me. And he ascends into this higher light body that he appears all over the world for a period, and then it ends. It doesn't seem to continue past a certain point in history. And so what the Catholic Church does is they hold this event of this, what they call a second coming, which is probably a misinterpretation of the original Greek that these manuscripts were written in. You have to understand, these manuscripts were based on oral transmission of repeating and repeating and repeating oral transmissions, that the Christ was going to come back again soon. Now, it's 2,000 years later right now. That's not soon. Emanuel Swedenborg said the second coming already occurred in heaven. It actually happened in heaven. And the judgment already occurred. That if you read Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell, who was an incredible mystic of Christ, said it already occurred. So the idea that we're 2,000 years in and people still believe that he's going to come back, and you see how corrupt the churches are. They're immensely, immensely corrupt, and people are still waiting, is the wrong message, because the right message is to learn how to follow the ethics of your own heart inside of God in the highest. And that Christ was always pointing the finger to God in the highest. Christ was never pointing the finger to himself. He kept referring to the Father, the Father. Well, that's from the Hebrew word Abba, which means mother, father. It's not a male image of God. So we get this idea of a man in the sky, and Jesus is pointing to a man in the sky. He always points the finger away from the human version of who he was. And he's always pointing to heaven, the kingdom of heaven, and the Father, which is Abba, which is the mother, father.
Actually, mother, father. So I've learned that Lord in Aramaic is Maria, which is like Maria Magdalena.
Right.
And so it's interesting that these play on words are in reflection of mother, father, God. But we've lost that. We've lost that connection to, I say, mother, father, God, and divine child, because that
right,
is
because we're created
yes
by the supreme God in the beginning, and so God breathed the Spirit of God into the nostrils of the Adam and the Eve, and so therefore we're the space that we occupy, like when you're sitting in meditation and prayer and you realize, God, I am, the space that the I am awareness is. When I say I am, when I close my eyes and I just feel the presence of I am, it's infinite space. And every one of us has this in us. Although most of us, our minds are jabbering away and we got a million things going on because we have to make so much money to pay so much money to get our food and our rent and whatever we're doing. But when we stop and we become still and we feel the space that we're occupying, this space can become God realized. And when it does, it's unbelievable what it feels like. It seems like everything everybody's doing to get fulfillment in their life is a complete waste of time, because the more you meditate, the more you pray, you realize, what I've realized is, look, I've had these experiences. I've met the Christ in person, standing right in front of me, and having him take me to heaven, shining like thousands of suns, the most pure being in the universe.
So where did you have this experience?
What's that?
Where did you have this experience?
Well, the first experience I had, remember, I'm just meditating. I don't have a belief system about the Christ. And it happened in Topanga, California. I was forced to live in a tent on my dad's 3 acres with horses because the government stole all the money out of my bank account for back taxes. And I was so poor and destitute. I had nowhere to live. I'd been tree planting for, I planted trees for 23 years for a living in Canada, and over 1.5 million trees went in the ground with my own hands. And they pay you so little. In the end, after all your expenses, you barely have enough money to survive the rest of the year. And so, but that year they took all my money away from me. So I was in this pouring rainstorm in Topanga, California in 1994. It was October. And I had my briefcase in there. I had my car parked in the mud by the horses. My dad had no room in the house. It was a really tiny house. And I started to get hypothermia, and I left my body. And I came before a crucifix that was made of granite. I was out of body, and it was pouring rain. And there was a baptismal font beneath the cross, and I fell into it and was purified by the Spirit of God. And then I was taken above the rain clouds by this motherly energy, very feminine energy, just picked my spirit up and lifted me up. And then I saw millions of tiny atoms from every direction in the universe come rushing together. It was like a sonic boom, and all of a sudden it materialized the body of Christ. And it was instantly, within 1 second, you look at his face and I fell flat on my face, instantly humbled to the ground. You cannot look. You cannot survive a direct gaze upon this supreme being. And then I tried to look again. Oh my God, you look down, because the entirety of the heavens are projected out of this one being. And he's so powerful. He doesn't really have a name. Truly, there's no name there. Mm-hmm. Truly, it's infinite, the universal creator person, the perfect person, that when the person Jesus walked on the ground, it was nothing like this. The disciples could stand next to him, but you couldn't look at this supreme person. You absolutely could not survive. He's too holy. There's too much love. The love is nothing compared to the graces. The graces that come off of the Christ are dwarf love. And there are numerous graces. There's too many of them to name. The feminine aspect of God are the graces, and they dwarf love. The perception of God's love is only a tiny portion of the totality of God. And then the Christ walked up to me. I looked at his feet and touched his feet, and he began orating teachings to me to understand the true meaning of the Gospels. And I created a book called Face to Face with Jesus Christ, and I worked really hard on it for years. And Christ appeared again in Topanga in 1997. It was Easter morning. And then again in 1999. And in 1999, he showed me the counterfeit Christ, which are so numerous. You have, people who do drugs, they say they met Jesus. That these counterfeit Christs are all over the astral plane, and they appear to people, deluding them, thinking the people who see the counterfeit think they're seeing the real Jesus. It's not Jesus. And if the person you're seeing is not so blinding that you can't look and you fall flat on your face, if you read the book of Enoch. So let's go. The book of Enoch. Enoch is the first prophet. And the book of Enoch, translated by the Archbishop of Cashel, Richard Lawrence, describes when God comes down in this crystal, it looks like a crystal spaceship in the book of Enoch, and he lands on the ground, and there's two supreme angels at his left and right. He's so powerful, when Enoch looks at him, he collapses to the ground instantly. He can't look. He looks, oh my God, you fall flat on your face. There's no way to stand up in the presence of the Christ, but there's a way to stand up in the presence of Jesus. Absolutely. He's a man. But the Christ is beyond the man, the person. The Christ appeared on the person Jesus when he comes to John the Baptist at the river Jordan, and he's baptized, and the Holy Spirit anoints him. And from that moment on in his life, the Christ is with him. So the Christ overtakes that person as as prophet Messiah.
And what about your experience in comparison to Mary Magdalene?
She's exactly the same. Now that I had 3 experiences with Mary Magdalene, and the first one was after my 3 meetings with the Christ, which are massive details and experience. There was a period where I was living with this native Indian woman in Los Angeles who was my deep friend, and she was not my lover, but she was my friend. And I said to God, I prayed, please, I want to meet Mary Magdalene, and I want to know who she is. And it was,
Can I ask you, why did you want to meet Mary Magdalene?
because I knew there was something about her. Now, I'd already met the mother of the Christ, who we call her Mary, the mother, which I don't know if that's her name, because Mary might be a title. But again, the mother is blinding. You fall on your face. She has so much love. You're just crying the whole time, because a human heart cannot bear that much love. And the Mother Mary appeared to me this past November, and my little daughter Astaria, we both saw her, and we were just crying the whole time. There's just too much love, blinding love, way beyond human capacity. So when I asked to meet Magdalene, what happened, and it was quite terrifying, because my friend and roommate was at a drug rehab facility in Canada, and I was alone in this apartment where we lived together. And the sun was up, and I feel this weight on the bed. Somebody sat on the bed physically, and I look up, and there's a woman sitting on the bed, but the door is locked. There's no way a person could have got in, and she's wearing a garment of stitching. I could look at the stitching and realize it was all hand stitched. There were beads, wooden beads, and she had beads in her hair, and she was black skinned, very dark skinned. She looked like a mixture between, North African, Egyptian and African, because Egypt is North Africa, but she wasn't from our time period. And I was like, who are you? And she didn't leave. It wasn't blurry. She was fully physical. I could have reached out and touched her. And I said, she can't be. I said, you can't be Mary Magdalene. I asked to meet Mary Magdalene. And I was scared, actually, because it was a full physical appearance. And then she went away in a blink of an eye. She was gone. The weight left the bed. And you have to understand, when in the post-resurrection period, Christ could appear physically. And I've seen him physically right in front of me. And you can't last more than a few seconds in his presence today. No one would last more than 3 seconds if he physically appeared in front of us. Just like, now remember, when Moses was on the Sinai, if anybody crossed those markers, they would burn, and they would not survive a direct encounter. So if the Christ is God in the highest in the flesh, then there's nobody's going to survive being anywhere near him.
So what happened after? You said 3 times, right?
So the second time, my wife and I are living in Sedona, Arizona, and in the middle of the night, it was 11:11 on the alarm clock. It wasn't very late into the night. I wake up, and there's a woman touching my leg, and she's wearing what's called the blue ephod, the robe of the high priest would wear, the sapphire blue ephod. And I can't see her face because her face is hooded. And she's trying to pull me out of my body to give me a vision. And I was seeing her with my eyes open. And she was so powerful. I was hyperventilating. And then I said, stop, I don't know who you are. And I can feel this energy. And then she stops, and I go to sleep, and I go out of body, and I meet Mary Magdalene, who is blinding person again. And she shows me how to decode the Mona Lisa painting. The Mona Lisa You see, Da Vinci was such a genius. I mean, I didn't find out what I'm going to tell you until I was near the end of my film that my wife and I made and the book, um, um, Mona Lisa's Little Secret. But Canada x-rayed the Mona Lisa, and underneath the surface of the paint of the image of what we think is a woman is an image of Christ, very clearly. And when the press, very little press, Canada got very little press for this discovery. What they thought is Da Vinci must have painted the Mona Lisa on top of an old painting of Jesus, like, because he didn't want to waste a canvas. But what Mona Lisa is, people think it's a girl named Lisa. See, the name of Jesus in Arabic today is Isa, I-S-A, but it comes from the Aramaic Yisa, which has a Y, and the Yisa became Jisa or Jisa, and then Jesus, right? It became Latinized, and then today Hebrews believe it was Yeshua, right? So you have all these transliterations of the name, but even today, the name of Jesus is Isa. So in French and Italian, you can't say le Isa because you can't have two vowels. You know that. So I took French in school. So you would say L apostrophe Isa, which looks like Lisa. So Mona, the Isa means Mona, the Jesus, and that Jesus is underneath of Mary Magdalene's image on the cover. On the surface of the painting, you're looking at Mary Magdalene through the interpretation of Da Vinci. And Da Vinci is most likely had a true vision of their marriage. And so that's why when people look at the painting, like I made this movie, Mona Lisa's Little Secret, and some people think it's a woman, some people think it's a man. Almost anybody you ask, some people think it's a man, some people think it's a woman.
It does.
And that's because it's both. Because it's the marriage of both of them. Now, there is a gospel called the Acts of John, where Jesus. No, I'm not sure if this is in the Acts of John. It might be in the Acts of John. That was banned by Pope Leo the Great because there's many other things in that gospel. But there's a transfiguration scene where Christ disrobes. He's shining very, very brightly, and when he takes his clothes off, they say he's not a man at all, which means he would have to be a woman or an alien, because it says he's not a man at all would mean he's shapeshifted into a woman. And we know from the Gnostic Gospels that he could shapeshift into anything he wanted to. And there are many examples of him shapeshifting. But the point is that the painting, Mary Magdalene appeared to me at exactly 11:11 and showed me how to decode it. The cipher in the code is an apostrophe, because you put an apostrophe, you don't say La Isa, you put L apostrophe Isa, means the Isa. And there's actually a book called Saint Isa about this theory that Jesus went to India and that he died there and he was known as Saint Isa. But you see, this is where we're going to get way deeper. We'd have to do another interview because Jesus, the person, mastered several different bodies of awakening that some were non-physical. Like in the Acts of John, one of the disciples, John, leans up against him and his hand goes right through him like a hologram. And it gets in, when you understand the three bodies that he mastered, he wasn't physically walking on water. That was one of the three bodies that he could project holographically that could do things like that, right? You couldn't physically, he wouldn't leave footprints when he walked. That's in the Acts of John. And neither did Krishna. Krishna did not leave footprints when he walked. That's one of the indications of an avatar, is they don't leave footprints when they walk. And that's because they're not actually physical the way we think they are.
Right.
They don't suffer. See, in the Acts of John, he didn't suffer on the cross at all. And he's dancing with the disciples in a circle. And upon his arrest, he's telling them to dance and to celebrate. And one time on my altar in my tent in Topanga Canyon, which at this point was a yurt, because I lived in that yurt for years, Jesus would only appear to me when I lived in that yurt. It was a very humble building. And I had a shiny picture of Jesus on my altar. The sun hit it and reflected on the ceiling this dancing, celebrating cross, like it was swirling light energy. I still have a picture of that apparition today. I took a picture of it. And when I found the Acts of John, in the Acts of John, John is crying and he's watching Jesus being tortured and crucified. And he goes into the cave on the Mount of Olives, and Jesus appears as a cross of light in the cave. And the cross of light speaks and says, John, I am suffering none of the things they will say of me. That's just a body on an old cross. I am the living God. You think I'm suffering right now? I mean, do you think Jesus identifies with this thing? I mean, if you do, then how did God create the whole universe, right? You want God to be God, or do you want God to be like us? If God's like us, then we're really in trouble.